when he's good, I want to work with him. I've done lots of shows supporting him on things like criminal justice reform, staying out of so many permanent wars and stuff like that he's done. But on other things that libertarians care a bunch about, we just had a vote on surveillance power and whether or not the deep state would get more power. Trump's been horrible on that.
Where are you generally at with Trump, who I think the name Trump was only mentioned once in this entire interview just a moment ago? I sense with most libertarians, they kind of like a lot of the stuff Trump has done, regulation, cut taxes. We don't seem to be going to extra wars. If anything, we're trying to get out of Afghanistan now, and we're not going to be nation building. That's all very libertarian stuff. I think a lot of libertarians, and one night we were at I think it was a YAL conference, and we had a table of libertarians, and it seemed very obvious to me that everyone sort of liked the things he was doing, but just had a personal, they just don't like him personally. Like it was that idea. And I sense that a lot of people have that thing. Is that kind of where you are? What do you make of this whole thing with Trump? And the liberty-minded people, because obviously his core is not a liberty-minded core. He would love to take more power if he could, but yet it seems like he's doing a pretty decent job.
He does have a sort of an authoritarian mindset, and I'm not even convinced he's ever read the Bill of Rights. So I guess that's an excuse. But full disclosure, and you mentioned this, I did work for a Rand Paul super PAC when he was running for president, and then I ran a Gary Johnson super PAC after that. So as a candidate, I was a never Trumper because I had a candidate, and his name wasn't Trump. As president, it's a totally different thing. And I'll go back to when Barack Obama was president. I spent a lot of my time organizing the Tea Party and opposing the stimulus and the bailouts and Obamacare and all that stuff. But when he wanted to do criminal justice reform, I went to the Justice Department and worked with Eric Holder in hopes to get something done. My attitude with Trump is kind of the same way. When he's good, I want to work with him. I've done lots of shows supporting him on things like criminal justice reform, staying out of so many permanent wars and stuff like that he's done. But on other things that libertarians care a bunch about, we just had a vote on surveillance power and whether or not the deep state would get more power. Trump's been horrible on that. And I don't know if it's bad advisors or what. If you care about debt and spending, Trump's been horrible on that. So it's a mixed bag, but our job when we have a president is to make them better. And so I don't spend all my time railing about Trump. I'm hoping that he will do some of the things that would make more sense. And I was hopeful, for instance, that he would be a strong voice on reopening the economy, but he's been a little hard to understand on this. He spent a lot of time picking on the governor of Georgia, Kemp, who was one of the first to unlock down their economy. So even on that, it's a mixed bag with Trump. But I'm a libertarian. I don't really get on board with big government, whether it's Republican or Democrat.
You mean you don't think Trump can solve all of your personal problems? Is that what you're telling me?
I kind of want to live in a world where I don't have to worry who the president is. That's how naive I am. Like if you had a president that actually
I'm with you, man.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move off Trump. You mentioned Rand Paul, and since you did work with him for a little bit, I had him on last week, and one of the things that I said to him was sort of exactly what you just laid out there about Trump, which is that one of the reasons I'm more okay now with Trump is that Rand Paul has become one of his biggest allies. And it's interesting because Paul's explanation of why he's okay with Trump is sort of what you just said, that, yeah, there's good, there's bad, but I can try to push him the best I can on the good stuff and the rest of it. So in a weird way, it almost seems to me that that's the best libertarians can do. We're not particularly good at getting candidates out there. The party's just an absolute disaster. Do you want to explain a little bit about why the party seems to be such a disaster, even though so many of the ideas, if you could get people to listen to them, they are right? And again, maybe sort of getting us back to the beginning, maybe they are about to have a real moment?
Yeah. So, first of all, I just point out that both Rand Paul and Mike Lee are in a highly leveraged position in the Senate, and they on any given vote, they could be the difference between passing and not passing. And I think they both done a very good job. Neither one of them, obviously, Rand Paul ran against Trump, and Mike Lee supported Ted Cruz in the primaries, but they've sort of stepped up and said, Mr. President, I'm going to work with you on the things that we share in common, and I'm going to try to convince you on some other things. And I think that's a really smart thing to do. And libertarians that criticize that, I don't really understand, because the point is to get the right policy. The point's not to sort of virtue signal that Trump's an awful guy. But for the Libertarian Party and third parties generally, I think that there is inevitably a moment where the two-party duopoly does break up. And the reason I think that the Libertarian Party has struggled so much is that it is the two parties that set the rules by which political parties operate. And Gary Johnson was a great example of that. They kept changing the rules of how you got onto the presidential stage. By any historical measure, Gary Johnson would have been on that stage, but they keep changing the rules. And that makes it very difficult for parties to compete, because if you're raising money for politics, the value pitch that you make to donors is, we can win this race. For a third party, and not just libertarians, but Greens or constitutionalists or whatever, the two parties that control all the power make it virtually impossible for them to compete. And it's usually some accident, like, say, Abraham Lincoln, that creates a new third party. It's going to happen, but it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. The Libertarian Party would have ballot access in all 50 states, would have a better donor base, would attract more talent if they were allowed to compete. And I don't know how that breaks through. They got to break through somehow.
Yeah. So you're saying it's not the naked guy running on stage that's going to break through. Is that what you're saying?
So when I was raising money for Gary Johnson, I had brought on some Republican donors, major guys that were finally paying attention to the Libertarian Party, and they tuned in to that convention on C-SPAN. And the first thing they saw was a fat, hairy, naked guy, and they're like, thanks.
There's other places to spend my money.
Yeah, of course, that was before imposed lockdowns, where none of us are really wearing pants anymore.
Exactly. There you go. So, all right. So to just sort of bring this full circle then. So with all of these ideas, and with us still in these rolling lockouts, you in DC, me in California, we're watching Texas and Florida. Are you worried that the biggest disaster looming, actually sort of directly coronavirus related, is that if there's suddenly a bump, let's say in 2 weeks in Texas or Florida, which in a weird way, it almost feels inevitably will have to happen, because that's sort of the risk that they're playing with, that the media will use that as such a freaking hammer to prove that they should have never opened up, that it basically puts DC, New York, and California in perpetual lockdown. And then it actually scares, I'm doing the reverse of the silver lining thing now. It actually scares the people who have been fighting for their freedom enough to shut up. And then next thing you know, Texas and Florida are back in a lockdown.
Yeah, I think it's a real risk. Historically, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but I've read so much. We all have, just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And during the Hong Kong flu, there was very much a peak in the winter of '68 and a second peak in the winter of '69. In the summer, things settled down a little bit. In that particular one, the peak wasn't in the same places. So San Francisco was a hotbed in the first peak of the Hong Kong flu. So how this plays out, I don't know. But I look at the same data that people on the other side are looking at. I look at what's going on in Sweden. I look at what's going on in New York and other places. And the way that people manipulate data to tell their story is deeply frustrating to me. So yes, we might have a beautiful revolution that discovers humility and localism and American freedom again. Or this could be the cudgel that big government types use to permanently implement social tracing to permanently implement a massive welfare state where most Americans don't work anymore, to permanently implement government-run healthcare. All of these things that they've wanted to do, they're trying to do it now.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.